Horns. An alien sci-fi romance. Book 4 in the Colony, Nick series. Written by Demelza Carlton. Vertumnus sighed. He wasn't sure whether he'd be better off taking all of Falcon Hahn's records and burning them, instead of auditing them. Talk about dodgy accounting, and it wasn't like the crooked bastard was here to answer for, well, he wasn't sure if it was mere ineptitude or outright fraud. But he needed to get the books in order for the new owner, or Hera would make sure something bad happened to him. The new owner was her stepson after all, and while he might not be a blood relation, he was family, and she'd made it clear to disrespect her family was to insult her personally. If he was feeling kind, he'd say the numbers were drunk. Maybe he should burn the books, and be done with it. Normal people kept electronic records, instead of stray pieces of paper in a drawer, covered in illegible scribble. But if the late Falcon Hahn had an heir, he needed to know if the man had left any assets behind which might belong to that heir, instead of the new owner of the first shot cantina. Or worse, debts the new heir would owe to Hera. Not a fate he'd wish on his worst enemy. Which was why he was still here, ruining his eyes trying to work out if he was looking at a receipt, or a recipe for some sort of cocktail. Maybe he should ask the barman. The man did have a pair of rather prominent wings, which Vertumnus thought were particularly impractical in the confined space behind the bar, where one wrong move could send a month's worth of stock smashing to the floor, but he had yet to hear the sound of breaking glass, so maybe the man was more careful than Vertumnus gave him credit for. What did he care? Staffing in this place wasn't his problem anymore. Falcon Hahn had chosen to run the place on his own, to cut down on costs and bring in more profit for himself and for Hera. The new owner had already engaged a bartender and a cook, and he'd advertised for more staff. Which might not be a bad thing. Hahn had made him handle the contracts at all the Intergalactic Dating Agency events, which had been torture of the worst kind. Watching all those pretty young girls willingly match themselves with a bunch of sex-starved titans. Horny beasts none of them would even look twice at, if the girls weren't well paid for their services. While he watched, and didn't dare consider forming a relationship with anyone. Not until he'd paid off his brother's debts, which would probably take him the rest of his life at this rate. "Hello Horns, who are you?" Vertumnus stilled. He didn't know that voice, and no one called him that. He rose slowly, unfolding to his full height. He might be a fawn, but he could intimidate better than any billy goat alive. It was all about the horns. Only to find he was of a similar height to the man behind him. A human no less. The man grinned, not the slightest bit fazed by Vertumnus. "I'm Hercules." He held out his hand. Of course he was. Though Vertumnus would never have guessed that Hera's stepson would be human. Hesitantly, Vertumnus shook Hercules' hand. "Vertumnus, your bookkeeper," he said. "Mine, not Hera's?" Hercules asked. Vertumnus sighed. Of course this was a test of loyalty. With Hera it always was. "I was the bookkeeper for the previous owner. He died rather suddenly, and I've been trying to make sense of his records so that I could hand them over to you. Hera's orders. If you'd like to keep me on after I've finished with this mess, that's up to you. In the colony I do the bookkeeping for a number of businesses, so if you don't want to work with me, I'm sure there's plenty of work to keep me busy. Hera has many diverse interests after all." Hercules just nodded, the smile never leaving his face. "Put together a quote for your services, with the rest of your report. I wouldn't mind having a good numbers man to check the financials, especially for my first year or two. I'd love to see what the first year's profit has been, and whether you think we can improve on that." Definitely not related to Hera. He seemed so open and honest, the opposite to anything she usually did. And yet. And what if the numbers don't add up? Vertumnus asked, knowing that was likely. Hercules shrugged. Well, a business doing badly can only get better, so that might not be a bad thing for us. I'd like to know what I'm starting with, before I get too ambitious. I mean, I have a bit of money I can invest if the business needs it, but not so much that I want to go broke. Stars know I don't want to go asking my stepmother for money. Vertumnus shuddered. No, you definitely don't want to owe Hera money. If only his brother Comus had realized that before he'd started borrowing. Or gambling more than he could afford to lose. Or getting himself killed, and leaving Vertumnus to foot the bill, working for Hera indefinitely until Comus's debts were paid. I'll get this to you as soon as I can, he promised. Flora peered through the blinds at the farm outside, where she wished she could be instead of stuck in the office. If the other girls could see her now, envying them working their butts off in the fields, doing the seeding, they'd laugh their asses off instead. Luckily, no one could see in here. Donna wouldn't have allowed anyone to see into her office, to all the dodgy deals she'd been doing over the bodies of the girls she was supposed to protect. If Flora had known about it before they left Earth, but even if she had, what could she have done? Donna was her guardian, and as her legal guardian, she'd signed off on her entrance into the Farm Stars program. Now Donna had disappeared and left her in charge of a business and all these people, when she didn't know the first thing about running a business, or any of this financial stuff. The comm chimed, and she answered it without even looking at the caller ID. Yes, she said. It's Vertumnus, from the First Shot Cantina. I need to ask for a favor. Her heart leaped. The hot fawn from the bar? The business manager, or whatever he was. Maybe he could help her with all this. And if she helped him, then maybe he'd be able to help her. Sure. What is it? He laughed. You really shouldn't agree to things so easily. Even verbal contracts can be binding in a court of law. She was already in enough trouble as it was. If he asked her to do something illegal, on top of everything Donna had done. But something told her he wasn't like Donna. If you were going to ask me to do something dodgy, you wouldn't have warned me. So tell me. What kind of favor? I'm pulling together the account books for the bar's new owner, and some of the records aren't particularly legible. I think if I could match them to the transaction records for Star Farm, I might be able to make more sense of this mess. A sort of Rosetta Stone, so to speak. What kind of financial records does the farm keep? She glared at Donna's tablet. Spreadsheets. So many damn spreadsheets, I'm seeing grids in my sleep. The things she was selling and for how much, and you wouldn't believe the credits just sitting in the farm account. Enough for us to live off champagne and chocolate for the next year, I imagine. When they'd been eating nothing but ration bars for a year. All this time, they could have been eating real food. Really? She'd never heard a man sound so happy in her life. If you'd permit me to take a look at them, I would be forever in your debt. Perhaps not quite chocolate and champagne, but I could get you a bottle of your favorite fizz from Forge. Stars, but she could do with a drink. Trying to sort out the mess Donna had left her was doing her head in. Sure. Come on over. If you want to eat anything except ration bars, you'll have to bring it with you though, because this might take a while. I've eaten worse things than ration bars. Besides, this won't take long. You could bring the files with you to tomorrow night's Intergalactic Dating Agency speed dating event. There's a new cook at the cantina, and food will be provided. Stars. She'd forgotten about that. Without Donna here, it wasn't like they all needed to get pregnant to fulfill their contracts anymore. She should have cancelled, but now it was probably too late to get a refund. Oh well, she might as well enjoy the free dinner, seeing as the farm had already paid for it. She should probably find out if any of the other girls wanted to go with her. Free food was free food, and no matter what Vertumnus said, anything was better than ration bars. When she asked the other girls at dinner, which of course was ration bars because that's all they had, who wanted to go to the first shot cantina the following night, she was surprised to find everyone else had the same idea as she had, even Linnea. The pregnancy cravings are driving me nuts. Just a chance to eat or drink something that isn't water or ration bars would be wonderful, she said with a shrug. Flora swallowed and nodded. When Donna was here, it had been so easy to take charge, but now when they looked at her to lead, it was such a weight on her shoulders. I guess we'll decide on our wardrobe options tomorrow evening. If you want to dress up, that is. Whatever the others did, she was definitely going to do her best to look good. Because she wanted Vertumnus to see her as the confident, in-control farm manager, and not some farm girl who'd just landed deep in the fertilizer pile and had no idea how to start climbing out. Like the carefully made-up woman she'd been in the bar, at the other speed dating events, when the farm was still under Donna's direction. Stars take it. Why had Donna disappeared, right when they needed her most? She could have taken care of fixing the farm's financial affairs in a heartbeat. But until someone found her, that left Flora in charge. With no idea what to fix first. She bit into her ration bar, and nearly gagged at the bland taste. As soon as the finances were fixed, she was going to do something about the awful food. You wanted the farm spreadsheets? Vertumnus looked up. Was it that late already? And the woman holding out the tablet definitely wasn't Donna. Too young for a start. Way too good for him. All Donna's working girls were beautiful, but he had to admit, Flora was the loveliest. It was the mix of green eyes and dark hair, like a dryad, that did it. Or maybe because she wore a green dress that covered everything, and yet clung to her body like he wished he could. If he got up from the table, she'd see he had a raging hard-on for her, so he stayed where he was. Sure. Put it there, thanks. He pointed at the only spot on the desk not covered in papers. He knew when she'd left, though her scent lingered. Something earthy and floral. He tried his best to ignore it as he picked up the tablet and flicked through it to find the invoices and spreadsheets he needed. Unlike Falcon Hahn, Donna had everything organized with meticulous care. Every payment Hahn made for every Intergalactic Dating Agency event, plus some consulting staff farm had done before the events had begun. Probably event planning, Vertumnus decided. One by one, he checked the transactions on the tablet against the scraps of paper he thought were to do with the farm. Yes. It all matched. Vertumnus typed furiously. He'd wasted so many hours working on this, but now it would pay off. He could actually go home instead of staying here until the place closed. And done. This place hadn't run at a huge profit, but it hadn't been losing money. Funnily enough, their biggest supplier was Star Farm. It was the initial consulting that had cost the most, but he imagined if the speed dating events continued to run as profitably as they had in the past, the cantina wouldn't have any problem paying for extra staff, or even better food and beer. Hera and Hercules would be happy, and he could go home and not worry about this place again. Vertumnus picked up the tablet, determined to return it to the girl before he left. He scanned the room. There she was. Looking utterly bored at the conversation of the man seated across from her, and making no effort to hide it. That's how she'd look at him too if they ever had a conversation, Vertumnus told himself. Well, unless he was paying her for her time. Then she might look just a little bit interested, but it wouldn't be genuine interest. He dropped the tablet on the table in front of her. Tell Donna thanks for the data, and I'll send her payment by the end of the week. He hurried out of the pub, before he was tempted to say something stupid. The only place he could ever be with a girl like this was in his dreams or his fantasies. And the sooner he got home, the sooner he could indulge in both. Flora smothered a yawn. It said a lot, that she actually found doing the data entry on Donna's spreadsheets more interesting than most of the men's conversation tonight. No wonder they had to come to events like this. They wouldn't know how to attract a woman if their life depended on it. Or maybe she'd gotten the worst of the bunch, and the others had been luckier. Well, the food was all gone, and this was the last man she had to talk to before she was expected to get up and mingle, which meant no one would notice if she slipped out early. Before Donna left, Flora had been the one who was supposed to watch everyone, to make sure they did as they were told. Not that Flora had ever actually tattled on anyone to Donna, though she suspected others had. Now was her chance to ask the hot fawn for a favor. She scanned the room, but he was nowhere to be seen. Had she missed her chance while listening to all these boring buggers drone on about themselves? Well, shit. No point in staying now then. She headed out of the pub, hoping the others had a better night than she had. Flora wasn't sure which was worse, going cross-eyed looking at Donna's spreadsheets, or trying to choke down yet another ration bar for breakfast. Or facing another one for lunch. If she got the financial stuff fixed, she'd know if they could afford to order real food. Flora reached for Donna's tablet reflexively. The same tablet that Hot Fawn had handled last night, quite happily. She knew she had to contact him. He already knew more about the farm's finances than she did after last night. And he owed her a favor. Well, sort of. She should have tried harder to talk to him last night. Even a discussion about spreadsheets would have been more interesting than whatever those bores had blathered about. She snuck a glance through the blinds. The other girls had finished breakfast, and were getting started on their farm work. They trusted her to take care of things, to lead them. Rue was the one who knew how to manage a farm, and Eva was an absolute whiz with numbers. But neither of them were here, which left her. They deserved better food for breakfast, and some security for the future. Donna had denied them that, and Flora would forever feel guilty for not doing something about it. She should have spoken up. Should have done something. Well, she could do something now. She hit the redial button on the comm app. He answered almost immediately. Donna, I was just thinking about you, and whether you would prefer the sour apple fizz or the sweet watermelon one. Flora took a deep breath. He looked every bit as gorgeous as he had last night, while she didn't dare turn her camera on. It's not Donna. Donna has disappeared. It's Flora, the girl who gave you the tablet last night. And I am grateful for it. Thanks to your help, the First Shot Cantina is now ready to transition to its new management. For a moment, Flora feared she'd burst into hysterical tears of relief. The Hot Fawn was exactly the man she needed to help her with this transition. Except, the watch had made it clear she wasn't allowed to talk about Donna or the Farm Stars program with anyone who didn't already know. But he already did know about the farm's financial records, which weren't exactly forbidden. Actually, I wanted to discuss some of those numbers I showed you last night in more detail. Could we meet? Her first thought was to bring him here, but that wouldn't work. The watch was surely watching to see if Donna reappeared, or any other illegal activity occurred. Worse, if one of the other girls walked in and discovered just how bad Flora was at managing the place, or asked why she hadn't fixed everything yet. I don't have an office, so it would have to be at somewhere like the First Shot Cantina, though they won't open for a few hours yet. If it's urgent, I'm at home now. Better than an office. And she vaguely remembered something about there being no surveillance inside people's homes, unlike in public areas, like offices, pubs or farms. Your place sounds perfect. I'll be there as soon as I can. The address popped up on the screen, an apartment in the Arbor Dome which Flora had yet to visit. Well, no time like the present, though she'd need to change out of her farm uniform. The green shift dresses they all wore while they were working didn't exactly scream capable, confident businesswoman. Nothing Flora owned said that, but Donna might have something in her wardrobe that would work. 20 minutes later, buttoned into a suit that was a size too big for her, Flora boarded an aircar. No one looked twice at her, and she was careful not to stare at the array of aliens among her fellow travelers. She was getting used to seeing fur and wings and skin of every hue, but the two semi-transparent people in the front seat of the car completely mystified her. She had no idea what kind of aliens they were, but she knew enough about Titans to know it was rude to ask, so she tamped down her curiosity and kept her eyes on her approaching destination, Metropolis City. Another aircar took her to the Arbor Dome, where it was faster to walk than wait for a skimmer to take her to the Fawn's apartment. Whose name she should probably know and use, she told herself, pulling out the tablet. Vertumnus. That sounded familiar, like she should remember it from somewhere, but for the life of her, she couldn't work out where. Hopefully it would come to her before she put her foot in her mouth. The corridor she hurried along looked like any other part of the colony, with no trees to be seen. Maybe the Arbor Dome was just a pretty name that didn't actually mean anything. She found the right number, and knocked on the door. A moment later, it slid open to reveal. Holy fuck! The hot Fawn wearing nothing but a pair of shorts, slung low on his hips. She was pretty sure her underwear evaporated at the sight. "VV Vertumnus," she squeaked, then wiped her sweat-slick palm down her skirt before she stuck out her hand. "I'm Flora." He took her hand in both of his. "Like I keep telling you, everyone calls me Tumnus. Except for Hercules, of course. I'm delighted you came to visit." He pressed his lips to the back of her hand, like some Regency rake about to ruin her. Or something. "Will you come in?" She stepped inside his apartment, and the door whooshed shut behind her. She barely noticed though, because she couldn't help but stare. She'd seen the advertising videos for the colony, but this was the first time she'd actually been inside one of the apartments the videos had promised. The whole place was round, like it was built inside a tower, with corners only where partitions separated the segments of what was really one big room. A tiny bathroom, a bed up on a platform, a table with seating in the center, and a kitchen with a glass-walled garden. She expected to see herbs or shrubs or something else edible, but the only thing inside it was a small bonsai, placed in the middle of a carefully raked desert of silvery sand. "Oh wow, a space bonsai," she breathed, stretching her hand out toward the glass. She'd heard about them, but they didn't do well on Earth, so she'd never actually seen a real one in person before. "Where did you get it?" "It was my brother's. He was a pilot," Vertumnus said, as though that explained everything. Flora had a million questions, but she knew most of them would only reveal how little she knew about the universe, so she ventured, "And he gave it to you?" Vertumnus snorted. "Not willingly." "A little braver now," she said, "I sense a story there." He nodded, then headed to the sink to pour 2 glasses of water from the tap, before handing her one. "We'll need drinks for this. Shall we sit?" He gestured toward the circular table with its segmented booth seats. Flora took her drink and sat facing the bonsai, so she could get a good look at it while the Fawn told his story. "Right, my brother. Comus was everybody's favorite. Even mine. He just had this smile and this way about him that he could charm anyone. So when he wanted to be a space pilot, our parents just gave him their blessing and sent him off to flight school. Sure, he caused his share of trouble, but he graduated and got assigned to a courier company. A good one. I think Dr. Fang owns it now. Anyway, like all graduate pilots, he got given a tiny bonsai to sit on the dash of every craft he flew. As it grew, it would form a unique pattern, in accordance with the G-forces Comus subjected it to. Every pilot's bonsai is unique, because no two pilots ever fly the same routes forever, and they kind of consider it a good luck charm. So much so that the bonsai went into the escape pod before Comus, and while he secured it, he got thrown across the pod and hit his head. Died instantly. The pod ejected and the plant survived. Go figure. So it's even more precious to you now, Flora said. Precious? No, a pilot's plant is worthless to anyone but themselves. If this was worth anything to anyone, he'd have sold it or gambled it long ago. I keep it because it's all that's left of my family. Only Comus and I made it off Tito, and now there's just me. He shook his head. But you don't need to hear my family sob story. You came here to ask for my help with something you didn't want to share over an open comm channel. What is it? Stars. He wasn't just hot, he was smart too. Flora squirmed in her too big suit, feeling even more stupid. You know how you said you finalized the numbers for the first shot cantina, so it could go to new owners? Well, I need someone to help me do the same thing for Star Farm. He frowned. Donna always took care of the books herself. I had no idea she was thinking of selling, but she's more than capable of putting together a financial statement. She could probably do it in her sleep. Flora swallowed. Well, that's the thing. She's gone missing and no one knows where she is. She was holding the farm in trust for all of us, but now we're all adults, the structure has to change, and I have no idea how to do any of this. Realization dawned on his face. You want me to create a financial statement for the farm? He shook his head. I can't. But you did one for the first shot cantina, and you said the records were a mess. Star Farm has all these spreadsheets that would make it easy. For anyone except her, of course. You don't understand. I work for the previous owner of the cantina, which is why I had to handle the final financials. My employer keeps me very busy, I couldn't possibly. Please? I'll do anything, Flora implored. Vertumnus had always thought it strange to call a brothel Star Farm, but looking at the fresh-faced girl before him, he began to understand. They were all like Flora, young and innocent-looking, all lovely in their own way. Right now, she looked decidedly uncomfortable in a suit that was too big for her, and his heart couldn't help but go out to her. If Donna was indeed missing, one of the girls would need to take care of the books while she was away. It wasn't hard, they were just numbers. With well-organized spreadsheets like the one Star Farm had, Vertumnus could have done their bookkeeping in his sleep. Except he couldn't. He worked for Hira, and every hour he worked for her paid off part of his brother's debts. If he crossed her, it was only a matter of time before she sent someone to break his legs, or worse. Then again, it was the weekend, and Hira rarely required him to work weekends. If he did this favor for Flora, and was back at work on Monday, with no one the wiser about his freelancing, maybe. Who was he kidding? Hira heard about everything. Maybe not right away, but eventually. And now her stepson Hercules was right here in the colony, it was only a matter of time. Vertumnus sighed. He really wanted to help her. Really, really wanted to help her. But if he did, he might end up maimed for life. Or dead, if Hira chose to make an example of him. What could be worth trading the rest of his life for? Then again, if Hira heard that he'd even been thinking about working for someone else, he'd be toast. Never mind if he hadn't agreed to it. So the real question was, if Hira signed his death warrant and sent an assassin after him tomorrow, what would he want to make his last night in the universe worthwhile? He didn't even need to think. Which probably made him a terrible person, really. One night with you, to do whatever I want. For one night with you, you can have a whole day of my services. The words were out of his mouth, and he couldn't drag them back. She was going to refuse, of course. As any sensible woman would, even one of Donna's delectable working girls. He could see it in her eyes. She wanted his help, but she was Donna's best. He'd never paid a prostitute for anything, so he had no idea what a night with Flora would cost. Probably more than he earned in a week. But if he might die tomorrow, at least he'd die happy. All right. He couldn't have heard right. Had she actually accepted his offer? "You're willing to spend a night with me, letting me do whatever I want, in exchange for me doing your bookkeeping?" he asked. "You're willing to spend a night with me, letting me do whatever I want, in exchange for me doing your bookkeeping?" Flora swallowed. She had said she'd do anything, and it wasn't more than any of the other girls had done on the Intergalactic Dating Agency nights. God, what Eva might still be doing now, wherever she was. They'd gotten naked with guys they barely knew, just to fulfill their contracts. Was this any worse than that? Sure, she hadn't slept with a stranger on any of those nights, telling herself that she had to keep an eye on the other girls, to make sure they were safe, and that they made it back to the farm safely at the end of the night, but if she had. She thought of Linnea, pregnant to a man she didn't know, who hadn't enjoyed it one bit. Or Danny, sold to a vampire, who might be drinking her blood right now. And Eva in the hands of that asshole. At least this man was attractive. Okay, smoking hot, and she'd heard that some aliens were particularly gifted in the downstairs department. "If you help me finalize the financials at Star Farm, you may do whatever you wish with me. From now until dawn tomorrow," Flora said, rising. She removed her jacket, and set it on the seat, not wanting to get anything on it. He jumped to his feet too, as if he did not believe her. "It's a deal," he said, holding out his hand for her to shake. She took his hand, then dropped to her knees. If he had a magical alien cock, she'd better find out what it could do sooner rather than later. And while she might not have as much experience in the bedroom as some girls, there was one thing she was definitely good at. She tugged down his shorts and parted her lips. Oh stars! Those sage green eyes staring wickedly up at him as she sucked the entire length of his cock down her throat, Vertumnus could have wept for joy. His knees were about to buckle. No, his cock was going to explode. He had her all night, and he was only going to last 5 minutes. Maybe less if she kept sucking him like that. And that thing she did with her tongue. An eternity passed in an instant, as he babbled a warning that he was about to come. He tried to pull out, but she was having none of it. "Stars, Flora," he roared as he poured himself down her throat. She took it all, every drop, those wicked green eyes never leaving his. Only when she drained him dry did she lick her lips and say, "Do you believe me now?" No. He felt lightheaded, like she'd sucked away part of his soul. He wouldn't believe any of this was real, because she was too good to be true. But that didn't stop him from enjoying every moment. "I want you naked, on the bed," he said. What he wanted was to make her come undone as surely as she'd made him. To see those wicked green eyes lose control as he touched the raw, untamed girl beneath the polished facade. To see her really feel everything he did to her. Stars, he wanted to make her scream. Instead, she was undressing with meticulous care, folding her clothes on the seat, as though she'd done this 1,000 times before, and she intended to walk out of here tomorrow morning, looking as well presented and put together as she had when she arrived. If he was going to die tomorrow, then by all the stars, he was going to make sure she remembered him. "Get on the bed now," he growled. Flora scrambled onto the bed, not wanting to take her eyes off him. She'd been just as bad when she was giving him a blowjob. She'd wanted to watch him fall apart, to see the power she held over him even as she knelt before him. God, she'd had to fold her underwear and hide it under her clothes, so he wouldn't see how soaked her knickers were. Even slightly deflated, his cock was still bigger than any other man's as he stalked toward her. Some tiny animal part of her wanted to run at the sight of the huge, horned alien with his massive cock, but the rest of her tingled with the thrill of it. She was his prey, and the anticipation. "Spread your legs wide." "No, wider," he ordered, wrapping meaty hands around her thighs to show her what he wanted. Flora's cheeks burned. Bared to him like this, he could see how wet she was. "Now hold on to my horns and don't let go." She swallowed, then wrapped her fingers lightly around his horns, just like she'd been told. He lowered his head between her thighs, so all she could see was his eyes, dark and stormy. Before he began to devour her, or at least that's what it felt like. His tongue, his lips, his teeth, his hands, driving her toward an orgasm she desperately wanted, yet it eluded her. She teetered on the edge, hearing her own voice breathlessly begging, but the beast wouldn't let her fall. Time after time, he caught her, changing the pace or the spot he focused on, or stopping entirely to smolder at her for a moment before resuming, building her up to another brink. Finally, he growled, "Come for me, Flora," before he did something with his fingers, deep inside her, the same time as he flicked his tongue, and she couldn't help it. She screamed, arching her back up as she saw stars, actual stars, where the ceiling should be. Only, he hadn't stopped. Her back had barely touched the bed once more before he ordered, "Come for me again, Flora," and she did, helpless to disobey even if she'd wanted to. She hung onto his horns for dear life, almost delirious in her ecstasy, barely able to breathe in anticipation of each growled command, "Again, Flora, again." Hours later, or so it seemed, for she'd lost count of how many orgasms he'd commanded her to have, though she knew it was more than in the rest of her life put together, she lay panting on the bed, aching in ways she never had before. Her hands and her thighs were rubbed raw from contact with his rough horns, and the parts between her thighs, well, even the slightest breath of breeze across her sensitized skin was enough to make her gasp. Vertumnus stood beside the bed, looking down at her, as he fisted his. Fuck, how had she fitted his cock in her mouth before? It was an alien beast all on its own, and it had her fixed in its sights. Swallowing, she edged her legs open wider, praying he would fit. "Go sit on the kitchen bench," he said. "Wait, what?" "Now," he barked. She hurried to obey, climbing up the glossy cupboards to sit with her legs dangling off the side of the counter. "Spread your legs wide." He did like to order her about, didn't he? She hauled her feet onto the bench on either side of her. "Wide enough for you?" If it wasn't, then too bad. She was a person, not a freaking pretzel. He stalked closer, until he stood right between her parted thighs, the head of his cock poised to enter her. His hand snaked around to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair as he pushed her head down. "Eyes down. I want you watching when I enter you." As if she could do anything else but stare at his enormous cock. Would it even fit? The other girls had said Titans were compatible with humans, but Linnea hadn't liked it, and… holy fuck. He slid into her slowly, so she could feel herself stretching to accommodate him. She'd never felt so full in her life, and he was barely halfway. "I don't think it will fit," she said. He laughed. "Then we will make it fit." His thumb rubbed against her clit, firm and insistent. He knew what she liked now, so there was no resisting him when he demanded, "Come for me, Flora." She did, crying out as she clenched down on that massive cock, which he'd somehow buried to the hilt inside her. "Eyes up on me now." She dragged her gaze up to his face, definitely drunk on pleasure. She'd never had such amazing sex before, and he'd barely made it inside her. "Hands on my shoulders or around my neck, and legs around my waist, Flora. And don't you dare close your eyes." She did as he asked, for it felt like the most natural thing in the world to want to hold him closer, as he began to move. One slow thrust, then another, as her toes curled against his taut ass. Fuck, he felt good inside her. "I want to fuck you until you scream," he said, increasing his pace. She vaguely remembered wanting other things, but they didn't matter now. All that mattered was him and his magical cock, thrusting deep and hard into her as an orgasm swelled inside her core, bigger than the sun, threatening to go supernova at Vertumnus's command. Vertumnus fucked Flora until she'd screamed herself hoarse, and then he fucked her some more. He'd thought she was perfection with her clothes on, but once he was inside her, all hot and tight and so very, very wet, he almost wondered if he'd died and gone to heaven already. He'd had to carry her back to the bed, where they'd dozed for a little while before he'd woken her to fuck her again. And again. And again. All the while, watching those wicked green eyes as the wild girl inside broke free with each orgasm. He would have thought his cock had had enough by the time dawn came around, yet here he was, staring at an exquisitely painful case of morning wood, with the perfect woman to cure it twined around his leg. It would only take a little effort to lift her and shift her so he could impale her on his needy cock, and watch her ride him, until her wicked green eyes wept with pleasure. Except it was dawn outside and his night with her was done. He forced himself to rise and head for the shower, where the cold water and a few strokes of his hand took care of his ardor. Well, until he stepped out of the bathroom and beheld her naked body sprawled face down on the bed. He hadn't had time to admire the perfection of her bottom before, all the roundness and softness he could ever want, yet could not have. Perhaps one day, if he ever worked off his debt to Hera, he could hire Flora for another night. If he lived past today, that was. I will be at your office at Star Farm at 9, to start reviewing your spreadsheets. Make sure you have everything ready for me, for the sooner we can begin, and the more efficiently we proceed, the sooner our business can be concluded, he said. And the less chance Hera would find out, he added silently to himself. Because last night he might have been ready to surrender to fate and die for his brother's debts, but now he had a new goal. One more night with Flora. Because he knew that after one night with her, no other woman would do. Flora's blush didn't fade until she was almost back at the farm. Not only had she fallen asleep in his bed, she'd actually forgotten he was supposed to work for her today. When she'd woken up and seen him emerging from the shower, it had been on the tip of her tongue to beg for more sex. Like he wasn't already doing her enough of a favor with the bookkeeping. Then again, after last night, she was pretty sure she'd gotten the better end of the deal. The best sex of her life, without question. He had ruined her, for all other men, forever. Even when she pressed her legs together in the aircar, she could still feel him pounding deep inside her. No one at breakfast asked where she'd been. They were all too busy choking down their ration bars before starting work for the day. Flora took a shower, then changed into another one of Donna's suits. Tomorrow, when this mess was sorted, she could wear her farm uniform again and spend some time with the plants. When Vertumnus arrived, looking completely professional, she had to cross her legs to keep her knickers from sliding down her legs, they were so sodden. Never mind that she wanted him to bend her over the desk and fuck her hard. She needed him to take care of the farm. So she said as little as possible, just watching him work, and fetching whatever he asked for. Invoices. Finding spreadsheets on the tablet. Contracts. More invoices. A ration bar for lunch, which he actually ate, to her surprise, though he was probably too busy working to care what he was eating. Finally, when the lights began to dim outside and the girls trooped inside for a shower before dinner, Vertumnus set down the tablet and stretched. Well? Flora asked eagerly. Well, you have a successful business here. Between the very low costs and additional income streams from consulting and the like, whoever you're selling it to will be quite pleased with their investment. Flora blinked. I already know that. What I need is. The comm chimed. Flora swallowed. The screen said the call came from the watch office. She couldn't not answer it. Yes, she quavered. Is that Flora? Yes. It's Detective Violet. Any luck finding Donna or your lost girl, Eva? Flora's heart constricted in her chest. No. Have you found them yet? No, but that's not why I'm calling. The financial aspects of the case are being handed over to the Organized Crime Division next week, and between you and me, those guys are out for blood, seeing as Star Farm was operating under their noses for a whole year and they knew nothing about it. And while past offenses can be laid at Donna's door, you're the one in charge now, so you need to get your house in order by the end of the week, or they could come after you. But if you have everything wound up tight, with nothing they can question, in accordance with the legal requirements Mr. Claw laid out, you should be fine. And if I don't have everything sorted out? A pause. Best case scenario? They'll arrest you, and you'll spend a few weeks in prison while they work out what they can pin on you. Worst case scenario? Well, you won't be allowed to stay in the colony, for a start, and it'll be a long time before you see freedom again. Just get it done, okay? The detective ended the call without even a goodbye. Flora turned tear-filled eyes on Vertumnus. I know our profit and loss sheets are good, because I'm the one who did all the data entry. What I don't know is how to turn the trust Donna created into something where we all have equal shares in the farm, and everyone has their own accounts for their first settler bonuses and salaries and whatever else they're entitled to, and what we do for the girls who've worked in the farm for a year but now want to leave, or who got pregnant because we thought we had to breed as part of our contracts. I don't want to go to prison. She buried her face in her hands. No way did she want the hot fawn to see her cry. She heard Vertumnus take a deep breath, then another, like he was trying not to shout at her for being such a ninny. Well, she was a ninny. She'd been trained in horticulture, not business and accounting structures. Every night. I'll be yours every night for as long as it takes you to fix this, she said. Stars, he was so stupid. They all looked like fresh-faced farm girls because that's what they were, even Flora. They weren't prostitutes, they were just looking to start families. And last night he treated her like a whore instead of a woman he wanted more than life itself. So stupid. Every cry, every scream, every reaction had been genuine, not some professional act she used on every man she encountered. That blowjob had been incredible enough to come from a professional, true, but maybe she was just gifted. Like she was perfect for him in every way. He owed it to her to make it up to her. Tonight and tomorrow, both in bed and in the office. All right, then let's make a list of everything you need me to do. Everything you can think of, because this is more than just doing the financial statements for a business. You want me to create a whole new business structure from scratch, and take down the old one along the way. But he'd do it, because he'd wasted a whole day of her time as well as last night, and he owed it to her. And then tonight. Flora nodded. Anything. I'll come home with you just like last night, and we can do anything you want. He managed to smile. You know what I really want? A fancy dinner. The sort of thing I haven't had since I left Tito. How about you? There was hunger in her eyes. The first time I had real food since I arrived was that night in the cantina. I would kill for more. He nodded. He'd lived on rations for the last year too, but that was more about saving money than being forced to do it. I know a place where the food is much better than the cantina. In fact, it looks like they're buying most of your harvest as it is. The freshest ingredients, all sourced right here in the colony, and they brew their own alcohol too. It's not cheap, but he owed it to her at the very least. Wining and dining her before taking her to bed, like he should have last night. But Star Farm can afford it. Especially as it will be a business dinner, she said fiercely. He had a hard-on already, and he hadn't even gotten her home yet. Anything you want, he swore. Flora groaned, then carefully used the napkin to wipe her lips. It's been that long since I tasted real chocolate. We've only been eating the chocolate-flavored ration bars for birthdays and special occasions, and we skipped mine. And strawberries. You know, you could easily grow those in the little garden in your kitchen, in the soil around your brother's tree. It's what I was learning to design while we were training to come here. But then she remembered she wasn't supposed to talk about that, and pressed her lips together. That bottle of fizz hadn't helped either, loosening her tongue like that. She probably shouldn't have drunk so much of it either, but with Vertumnus topping up her glass and all the lovely food. You got chocolate-flavored ration bars? Wow. I never knew they came in more than one flavor. I only ever get the basic ones, he said, taking a swig from his own wine glass. Now this I don't understand. I've been trapped on a farm, slaving away for a woman who lied to us about the contracts we'd signed and everything we had to do, not knowing there was real food available, so I know why I've been stuck eating ration bars. But you've been free, living your life in the colony, able to go to any pub or restaurant you like, and even grow your own food. Why have you been eating ration bars? Vertumnus ducked his head. Because they're basic subsistence, something the colony provides free to everyone, like they provide houses or jobs. I work for, well, my brother always lived life to the fullest. Parties and people and excitement, and gambling. He gambled with everyone and everything, especially his life, but I didn't realize how much money he'd lost until he died, and the lender came to collect. As my brother's only living relative, I had a choice. I could become an example of what happens to people who don't pay their debts, or I could work for my brother's creditor, until the debt's paid off. At the current rate of interest, working a 40-hour week, I figure I might be able to afford another dinner like this, maybe in 20 years? Possibly 18 if I work weekends. He laughed, but it sounded sour. Flora snorted. So we're both indentured laborers. Me because Star Farm is all I have, thanks to my dodgy bitch of an aunt, and if I don't fix it, I'll be going to prison, and you because of the things your brother did. Fuck family. They suck. Vertumnus raised his glass. I loved my brother. Everyone did. I just wish I'd been able to have some of the good times he spent all that money on, instead of just being the one working my ass off to pay it back. Flora lifted her glass too. To dodgy relatives who use us, getting what's coming to them, you know what? I used to hope Donna would come back, so she could fix everything, but the longer she's gone, the more I hope she never does. Or if she does, she goes to prison for what she's done. If she came back to Star Farm, I'd con the watch myself so they could come pick her up. Vertumnus stared at her mournfully. You know, you don't have to come home with me. You could just... Flora slapped her hands on the table and stood up. We have a deal, don't we? My nights are yours and your days are mine. You can't back out on me now, Vertumnus. I need you. Tumnus wasn't quite sure how it happened. He'd intended to make slow, tender love to Flora, focusing entirely on her pleasure for most of the night, but they hadn't made it 3 steps into his apartment before he had her pinned against the door, urging him to take her harder. Then he'd stretched her out on the kitchen bench, and proceeded to smother her body in the chocolate sauce he'd persuaded the chef to let him take home, before licking it all off. And then he'd bundled her into the shower to take her against the shower wall, not once, but 3 times, before he'd persuaded her to sit on his face, after which she'd straddled him, and then... He couldn't even remember half of what they'd done. Only that her wicked green eyes had regarded him through all of it, urging him on. If only every night could be this magical, he thought as she lay sleeping in his arms. But morning would come, and he knew what he had to do. He had to work to save her from prison and slavery, even if he knew he couldn't save himself. Because Flora deserved freedom more than anyone else he'd ever met, and if that was the one thing he could give her, then he would, no matter what the cost. Vertumnus slumped in his chair, looking for all the world like he'd just finished running a marathon or something. Well, they had been working all day. Right, that's all the account details added. You should be able to send everyone their first settler bonuses now, he said. Using Donna's tablet, for Vertumnus was still frowning at his own, Flora did just that. What about the salaries for a year of working on the farm? The man from the watch said everyone needed to be paid for that, too. She bit her lip. Ah, but that's not entirely true. You see, Star Farm was set up as a collective with equal shareholders, and all income has been held in trust since it was formed. None of you were employees but shareholders, and while some of the girls might have been children when the collective was formed, you're now all adults, capable of holding accounts and making your own decisions. Donna was the legal guardian of anyone under the age of majority, which I understand was the case with many of the girls here, but her records are meticulous. Not even she drew a salary, because she was a shareholder too. There is nothing in any of these contracts about salary or rates of pay. Even in the contracts you signed back on Earth, which I understand are now invalid, the terms are clear. All shareholders who fulfill the terms of the contract would be entitled to an equal share of the Star Farm Collective's assets at the end of the contract term, and they are only entitled to room, board and uniforms as required until that time. Flora's head was spinning. Contracts and terms and stuff were definitely not part of her horticulture training. But you said the contracts are invalid. So, how can we possibly fulfill them if they don't really exist? Vertumnus grinned. Well, that's where you have an advantage over Donna. You see, she might have known the contracts weren't valid, or maybe she didn't, but you were still underage when you signed yours, so you have the excuse of believing the contracts to be legal, and so you acted accordingly in good faith. Just like all the other girls. But now you know that's not the case, you're working to remedy that, and dissolving the collective early as soon as you found out. So all we have to do is allocate equal shares to all of you, for the value of the farm, for which you are all entitled to claim your share of the farm's profits for that financial year, and we don't have to worry about salaries at all. In fact, you'll make significant and entirely legal savings on your income tax, particularly if you choose to invest your profits back in the farm, or leave it in the farm's accounts as capital. But what about the girls who want to leave the farm? Like Franny and Danny and, well, I don't know who else. I'll have to ask them. More work to do, when she was already exhausted. And she'd promised Vertumnus her nights, so sleep wasn't going to be on the cards for a while yet. Well, you have a choice. You can retain the initial collective, and buy those girls out either out of the farm's existing capital, or one or more of the remaining shareholders might choose to take over their shares, and compensate them accordingly. Alternatively, you could dissolve the collective altogether, and pay everyone out, and then start anew with a brand new collective, with only the new shareholders buying in, with equal shares. All of the options are valid and legal, and would require the same amount of work on my part. Which he wouldn't have time to do today, because she had to ask the girls. Donna had made all the decisions for them in the past, but if they were to all be equal shareholders going forward, they should all have a say. What about Donna's share? Flora blurted out. Vertumnus shrugged. Just as she held everything in trust for you girls, now the farm can hold her share in trust for her, whether you keep the original collective, or dissolve it. That part's easy too. Easy for him, she wanted to say. So, what do we still need to do to keep me from getting arrested? Vertumnus grimaced. Well, you need to speak to the other shareholders, to decide who wants to remain a shareholder, and then you all need to decide whether to keep the original collective, or start a new one. When you can tell me that, I'll set it all up for you. She wanted to kiss him. Actually, no, she wanted to get down on her knees, take him in her mouth and really show him how grateful she was. Later, back at his place. But she'd have to stay here for dinner. Then again, if Vertumnus stayed too, he could explain anything she couldn't answer, and he'd know exactly what everyone wanted. Now the issue is that with all these consulting fees, the value of the farm is quite high, so we have to hope there aren't too many people who want to leave, because the more people you have to buy out, the more expensive it could get. Given that consulting fees account for the majority of the farm's income, unless you plan to do a lot more consulting in the near future, having to buy out too many people might leave you, or the collective, in quite a precarious financial position. Flora shook her head. We don't consult. We've been stuck inside this farm, with no contact with anyone, until a few weeks ago, when Donna signed us up for the Intergalactic Dating Agency. When did this consulting supposedly happen? Vertumnus frowned as he scrolled through a spreadsheet on his tablet. Here's the last one. Fee for services from Ivana, Shade Services. Flora's heart sank right down into her shoes. Those aren't consulting fees. Donna sold Eva to Shade. I heard him say so. Well, Donna had sold him a blonde girl, which described Eva well enough. She swallowed. The watch definitely said human trafficking wasn't legal. But it says services were provided, not a person. That isn't illegal here. Even if the services were of a sexual nature, that's still legal. Flora shook her head. The man from the watch definitely said it wasn't legal to sell people here. So if there's money in the farm's accounts from when Donna sold Eva to that man, we have to give it back. Except, Eva's still missing. I can't ask her what she wants to do about the farm until we find her. Vertumnus held up his hands. You don't need to. As long as you have a majority vote on whether to keep the collective or dissolve it, you can hold her share in trust, just like Donna's. Again, it's easy to fix, once we know what your shareholders decide. He rose. Discuss it with them tonight, and let me know how you wish to proceed. Panic seized her chest. Can't you stay and tell them? You understand all of this way better than I do. Stay for dinner, and then I can go home with you to pay you in advance for tomorrow. He grimaced. I have to work tomorrow. I have an employer who doesn't tolerate, well, much of anything, really. I can come by tomorrow evening, after I've finished work for the day. We can discuss things further then. But Donna had deserted her, and now Vertumnus was going to, too. She never should have left Earth. Should have run away from Donna, and taken her chances with foster care until she was old enough to fend for herself. Sure, she never would have seen a space bonsai, or experienced the best sex of her life for not one night but 2 in a row, but Vertumnus seized her, his lips fastening to hers. She was too shocked by his kiss to respond for a moment, but when she did, he was already pulling away. I swear to you, I will help you fix this. I won't let you go to prison for someone else's stuff up. I will see you tomorrow night, as soon as I can get away, and I promise that the collective we create will be so watertight, not even the watch will be able to find anything wrong with it. And then he was gone, leaving her empty and aching and so fucking alone it wasn't funny anymore. Flora wanted to scream and hit things like a tantruming toddler. Why couldn't life be fair just once? Human trafficking. Shade Services. Eden Labs. The Intergalactic Dating Agency at the First Shot, Cantina. Even Forge. Every company Star Farm had done business with was either one of Hera's or one whose services she used. The watch were bound to get suspicious, especially when they realized the farm was selling people to some of them. Vertumnus scrubbed his face with his hands. Much though he didn't want to, he had to tell Hera. This wasn't his mess, it was hers, but the watch already had Flora in their sights, and he knew if Hera was implicated in any of Star Farm's activities, she'd do everything within her power to shift the blame to someone else. Flora would suffer for this, something he couldn't possibly allow. The seed of an idea began to blossom, like the initial capital in a wildly successful startup. He had to scale it responsibly, instead of letting it phoenix and fail. Flora's life depended on it. Before he could lose his courage, Vertumnus calmed Hera. It was almost like she'd been waiting for his call. "Vertumnus, my horned numbers wizard," she drawled. "I'm sorry to interrupt what I hope was a lovely evening, Hera, but I've come across a business matter that just couldn't wait," Vertumnus began. "Sounds intriguing. Tell me more," she commanded. So he did, glad he was in the privacy of his home, where no one could hear him outline the sordid details of the Farm Stars scheme that had snared Flora and her friends. "So what do you propose I do about this?" Hera asked, when Vertumnus had told her everything. Well, almost everything. She didn't need to know about Flora. Vertumnus took a deep breath. This was where things might get tricky. "I propose I take some time off, call it annual leave perhaps, and do a bit of forensic accounting and freelancing, as it were. Offer my services to Star Farm to help them set up their new business framework, and while I'm going through things with a fine-tooth comb, I make sure nothing points back to you when the Watcher's Organized Crime Division come to investigate." "Ooh, initiative. I like that," Hera purred. "I'll tell you what. You may have a week's holiday to do what you wish at Star Farm. 1 week and 1 week only. I want you gone by the time the Watch arrive. But if there is one line item, one single breadcrumb that points back to me, you will spend the rest of your miserable life wishing you died along with your brother. And that farm girl you're fucking. If you fail me, my men will extract the rest of your debt from her, willing or not." Flora? Hera knew about her and, what was worse, was threatening Flora. "You can't. She has nothing to do with this. Leave her alone." Vertumnus stammered, but he was too late. Hera had already ended the call. Vertumnus swallowed. He'd already sworn to save Flora, no matter what the cost. Now he'd make doubly sure she was safe. And if that helped Hera out too, well, so be it. While Flora still wasn't sure she'd explained it right, everyone had voted to keep Star Farm Collective as it was. Aside from Danny and Franny, no one else wanted to leave, though Linnea said she might have to when her baby was born, because she wasn't sure how she'd raise a child and work on the farm, and the money from buying out her share might help support her. Which made Flora realize she wasn't the only one who'd lost family. They all had, which was why they'd signed up for the Farm Stars program in the first place, but she and Linnea had lost even more than that since they'd arrived here. Donna had disappeared, but the father of Linnea's baby was gone too, and now she'd have to bring the child up as a single mother. Much harder than picking up the pieces of Star Farm, like Flora had to do. Yet when she looked up, Linnea had vanished. Flora found her sniffling on a bench in the bathroom, with one hand on the rounded belly that was just starting to show through her dress. "Some days I consider getting rid of it," Linnea whispered. "But then, I remember being all alone in the foster home and how I wished for someone I could love, and I just can't. He or she is all the family I have. I can't just get rid of them, like my family did to me." Flora sat down beside her. "Sometimes you have to build your own family. Pick the people you do want in your life, and to hell with everyone else. And sometimes you don't get to choose. Sometimes, you're just thrown together in a bunch of stasis pods and flown halfway across the galaxy, and wake up on an alien world with actual aliens, and you have to make the best of it. But you're not alone. You're a farm star, the same as me. The same as all of us. And as long as you want to stay at Star Farm, there's a place for you. I mean, it's got to be a pretty amazing place to bring up a kid. There's a whole bunch of live-in babysitters, open space for them to crawl and walk and run, and all the ration bars they could ever want to eat. Linnea laughed weakly. God, tell me we'll be able to eat real food again before this baby's born. It's not so bad now because I don't mind bringing ration bars back up when the morning sickness gets really bad, but some days I get these crazy cravings for the most ordinary things. Like cheese. Or watermelon. And the other morning, poached eggs. I can't remember the last time I had real eggs. Even Flora drooled a little over that one. The first thing I'm going to buy when we've got our finances sorted is a whole flock of chickens. I can't believe Donna didn't get them already. Just imagine, having so many eggs we could make a pavlova big enough for all of us, with strawberries and cream. You'd need cows for cream though, Linnea said. Not if you use coconut cream, and then there's mock cream. It's more stable than the dairy stuff, especially in space. At least, that's what Franny told me, and she's the expert in these things, Flora said. Linnea grinned. Okay, you've got me. For my baby's first birthday, I want a pavlova with strawberries and cream, made by Franny of course, with ingredients from right here in the colony. And I want everyone to come to the party. I'll do everything I can to make that happen for you. For both of you. Flora patted Linnea's tummy, feeling suddenly awkward. If they really were family, then Linnea was carrying her niece or nephew in there. Flora was about to become an aunt, and she was barely 21. Flora tried hard to fall asleep that night, but sleep just wouldn't come. She thought of the last 2 nights she'd spent with Vertumnus, feeling the ghostly ache of his powerful thrusts even now, but it was nothing to wrapping her body around the real man. Alien. Fawn. Whatever. The sex was supposed to be payment for his services, but she was addicted to him more readily than any drug. 5 minutes into the first night, she'd already known that. Now, after 2 nights and 2 days? The withdrawal was killing her. Was it too soon to fall in love with a man? Well, she'd always thought he was hot, and maybe a little into her, at the Intergalactic Dating Agency events, but they'd always been too busy supervising those things to do any speed dating of their own. The kind of conversations where you learned about their favorite color, their ideal date, or that their biggest secret was a massive cock she'd happily ride into next week. She was soaking wet just thinking about him, wishing he was here. Well, not here, in a room full of women who could hear every breath, every moan, every slap of his balls against her as he thrust deep. She only had to wait until tomorrow night, Flora told herself. She'd have him all to herself in the office, and he could help her deal with the business, and then they'd get busy and... She tried taking care of herself, but it just wasn't the same. Compared to the explosive orgasms he delivered in rapid succession, the ones she could manage were more like damp squibs. Still she couldn't sleep. Eventually she must have drifted off at some point, because when she next opened her eyes, it was daylight outside, and the other girls were headed for the showers. Just another day on the farm. She dressed in her normal uniform, just like the others, but she lingered in the office after breakfast instead of going outside. She'd be helping with harvest today, some sort of grain that she didn't know much about. The others had learned about large-scale farming, but she'd been allowed to study horticulture, specifically plants that could be grown in microfarms in low gravity. A sort of medieval kitchen garden that fitted inside the kitchen of an apartment like Vertumnus's. And there she was, thinking about him again. Good morning. Flora's mouth dropped open as she spun around. What the hell are you doing here? Tumnus grinned. Admiring the view before we start work for the day. He was too. She wore a short green dress that skimmed over her breasts, down to her waist, then flared out a bit before ending mid-thigh. Her eyes practically glowed when she wore that color. He had a sudden vision of her going down on him like that, green eyes staring up at him as she sucked his cock, before he bent her over the desk, flipping up that short skirt to bury himself deep inside her. But he didn't dare. Not until he was sure she'd be safe, from Hera and the watch and whoever else wanted to hurt her. "I thought you were working for your mob boss Loan Shark today," Flora said. "It occurred to me that I had some annual leaving owing that I'd never bothered to take, so I'm technically on holiday," he said. Better than telling her Hera had threatened her, if he didn't do this right. "You're giving up your holidays to work for me?" "That sounds awful," Flora said. "Only the days. For my nights, I'm hoping for some hot holiday romance," he said. Longing filled her eyes. "Oh yes. That sounds wonderful. But work first, so we can play later. First, what did your fellow farmers decide?" He nodded as she outlined last night's discussions, then said, "Well, that's easy, I guess. But before we can do a final valuation on the farm and work out what a share is worth to pay out the 2 girls who want to leave, we need to work out what to do with those consulting fees. I was thinking, if they stay as part of the farm's income, the value will be much higher, but if the credits go to the girls who provided the services, then the shares will be worth less." "Did you ask the girls what they want?" "The ones Donna sold, or the ones who want to leave?" Flora asked. "Both." "Either." "What did they say?" "Well, Franny's entered into a partnership in a bakery, so I don't think she expected anything from Star Farm. Danny's hooked up with a rich vampire dentist, so I don't think she cares about money anymore. And the girls who were sold, well, Danny of course, and Eva, who's still missing, so I can't ask her." "What about the other girls?" he asked. "What other girls?" "Donna didn't sell anyone else," Flora said hotly. Vertumnus pulled up the other consulting fees. "This one says someone named Linnea provided consulting services to the First Shot Cantina, and then here. Someone bought Linnea?" Flora's mouth hung open for a moment, before realization dawned. The baby. Whoever got her pregnant must have paid for her, or the baby. Only the guy died, so I guess she stayed here instead of going to live with him. Vertumnus wet his lips. He didn't like this, and Flora was going to like it even less. "There's more," he began. "How many more?" "5. 5 sets of consulting fees, all before the one for Linnea." "5 more girls? Who else did Donna sell?" "Well, that's the thing. It wasn't 5 girls. It was just one. 5 times. Look." Vertumnus held out his tablet so she could see it. She would barely believe it, as it was. He didn't want to believe it. Flora glared at the screen. "I've never done any consulting with Eden Labs. I've never even met anyone who works there. I mean, I know we're growing crops for them and providing them with results, but Rue was the one dealing with that, not me. Maybe they got us mixed up. I mean, it's not like they ever met us. But you said it yourself, all the others were sold and sold only once. Yet you." Anger burned in him, hotter than the Alton sun. Who had dared to try to possess Flora, like she could be bought? Not once but 5 freaking times? Vertumnus wanted to rip off the man's balls and feed them to him until he choked on them. "Tell me who she sold you to, and I'll kill him." Slowly, Vertumnus swore. "I don't know. You're the only guy I've touched since I woke up here, and that was this week." Flora protested. "Then how is this possible?" Flora pressed her lips together. "I don't know, but what I do know is where Donna kept the contracts. The watch don't have them, because they were hidden in with her clothes. I only found them when I borrowed her suit to meet with you. I saw the one for Eva and the one for Danny, but I didn't look under those. Maybe the one for me is in there too. Is there anything else the watch don't know about?" Vertumnus asked. "Because if any of it implicated Hera, he had to destroy it before they found out." "Let's take a look," she said grimly. "Look at this." I mean, there's no way it's enforceable by law, because the whole thing is illegal, but I understand why your aunt kept these safe. Because just the threat of showing the contract to the watch would be enough to make them keep to the terms. And these guys signed them. They paid a hefty sum, and agree to cover the costs of room and board and healthcare for the life of the woman in the contract, and her children. Even if the guy went to prison for signing the contract in the first place, they'd still be liable for all of that. Flora peered over his shoulder. Yes, it said all that on the contract with Danny's name on it. I should give that one to Danny as insurance, in case she ever wants to leave her vampire. Eva's one too, when they find her. I'm not sure the one for Linnea would be much use though. The guy who signed it is dead. Ah, but this demonstrates that she and her children are Falcon Hahn's heirs. He might not have been rolling in credits, but he did manage the First Shot Cantina for a year, at a tidy profit. Even if Linnea herself doesn't need the money, she might want to keep it for her children. Flora sighed. All the more reason for Linnea to keep the child. The only one that's different is yours. Instead of children, it uses the word offspring, and there's an extra clause that any offspring are the property of Eden Labs, from the moment of conception. What the fuck? That's so archaic. It's my body and my choice. Not some scientist. Flora snapped. Not just any scientist. Rocaille, the director of Eden Labs, Vertumnus said. Never heard of him. And if he thinks he owns any part of me, I'll kick his ass all the way back to Tito or Earth or wherever he came from. Flora wished she knew what the man looked like, so she could visualize launching him into orbit with her foot. He was probably some disgusting old man, like the bartender who'd bought Linnea. I'd love to see that, but it still doesn't explain why he paid 5 times as much for you as any of the others, Vertumnus said. She opened her mouth to retort that it must be because he knew what she was worth, but the words just didn't feel right. She wasn't any better than Danny or Eva or Linnea. There was nothing special about her to justify someone spending an astronomical sum to buy her. We should ask him, she said instead, rolling the idea around in her head. Vertumnus stared at her. Actually, that might not be a bad idea. If we use Donna's tablet to set up a meeting, he might just take the bait and agree to meet with us. You're coming with me. It surprised her, but she also felt relieved too. Because a man who thought he could buy her body probably had no morals at all, and if he thought he owned her, there was nothing to stop him from trying to take what he thought was his, if she turned up alone. If she turned up with Vertumnus though. I wouldn't trust that slick bastard anywhere near you, especially now I've seen this contract. Why don't you want me to come with you? He blinked, as though the idea had just occurred to him. No, I think it'd be good to have you there, especially if he already knows you. She took a deep breath. Let's set it up then. 20 minutes later, they had an appointment with Rocaille for that very afternoon at Eden Labs. She'd even asked Rocaille's secretary to put in a note that the meeting was to discuss her consulting contract. She accepted the appointment in her calendar with a flourish, to find Vertumnus's eyes on her. What? You're good at managing things. Making swift decisions when they need to be made. The girls of Star Farm are lucky to have you in charge here. Flora didn't think any of them were lucky at all. Sold into space slavery, only to be set free on an alien planet with no way home, falling in love with hot alien men who were so stellar in the bedroom, she'd never want a human man again. She shook her head. It sounded like something out of a novel, or an adults-only TV series she'd have had to sneak into the viewing room to watch late at night, when everyone else was asleep. You still have another decision to make, before I can set up Star Farm the way you want it, so you can buy out those shares. You need to work out what you want to do with those consulting fees, Vertumnus pressed. Flora closed her eyes. All those credits in the farm's accounts, they could be used to buy out Danny and Franny. Without them, even if it lowered the value of everyone's shares, the farm would have very little capital left. But if Danny's vampire should tire of her, or if Shade hurt Eva, both girls could do with the money the men had paid for them. There was no question about Linnea. No matter what she and her baby stood to inherit from Falcon Hahn, life would be hard as a single mum. She needed every credit she could get. The consulting fees go to the girls who were sold. That money belongs to them, not Star Farm. You're about to become a very rich woman then, Vertumnus said. Flora blinked. Of course. The others would get a fortune, but Rocaille had paid far more for her. I don't really need it. I'm just going to be here, taking care of the farm. Can't we just leave mine in the farm accounts? It's not like Eden Labs actually got anything for their money. I'm not like the other girls. Vertumnus shook his head. It's all or nothing, I'm afraid. And you don't know what Eden Labs wanted, until you talk to Rocaille. If you're determined to invest your time and money in Star Farm though, might I make a suggestion? You could always buy out the shares of the girls who want to leave, instead of finding the money from the farm accounts. That would give you 3 shares instead of just 1, and more votes when a decision needs to be made by all shareholders. In fact, if you persuaded enough of the girls to surrender their shares so you could buy them, you could even become the majority shareholder, which would give you full control of the farm, and you wouldn't need to ask the other shareholders to vote on anything going forward. As your financial advisor, I can definitely tell you that Star Farm is a good investment for the future, whether you buy 2 shares, or all of them. Flora could only shake her head in wonderment. What kind of universe bestowed a man with both a magic cock and a brilliant brain? She'd never wanted any man this much in her life. He was almost perfect. As my financial advisor, what do you think I should do? She asked. Vertumnus took a deep breath. I tell you to buy those 2 shares, and any more that come available. I also want to tell you to bend over that desk, so I can fuck you, but it's barely lunchtime. We should probably get more work done, no matter how much I want to do other things. Flora couldn't help it. She laughed. It's a deal. As soon as the workday's done, we are totally doing it on the desk. Sitting in the waiting room outside the reception desk at Eden Labs, Flora wished for the 1000th time that she'd changed out of her farm uniform and into one of Donna's suits. This place was sleek and clean and futuristic and, well, everything she'd expected when she first saw the ads for the colony. Nothing like the utilitarian boxy buildings in Star Farm. Whereas this place whispered that it was the future of everything, while Star Farm was definitely part of the past. Even the secretary behind the front desk looked polished to perfection. Her clothes were the daytime designer version of the dresses they'd worn to the First Shot Cantina for speed dating events, and her makeup and nails would send Franny into a frenzy of envy before she tried to recreate the look for herself, of course. If Vertumnus hadn't been sitting beside her, holding tight to her hand, Flora might have walked right out and gone back to Star Farm for good. A frosted glass door hissed open, and 2 men walked out, shaking hands with practiced smiles that looked like they'd stepped right out of an advertisement for expensive suits. Wonderful. I'll have my people talk to yours to schedule everything in so we can start filming next week, the older one of the 2 said. He looked kind of familiar, though Flora wasn't sure where she'd seen him before. You do that, the younger one said, with a smile that definitely didn't reach his eyes. He turned to go back through the door. Oh, and one more thing. I promised my darling Pandora that I'd bring home some plants for her kitchen garden. I don't suppose you have some herb seedlings, or maybe a fruit tree or 2, I could take home with me perhaps? The older man asked, sounding hopeful. The other one made an exasperated sound, then hitched his smile back up before turning back to the first man. I've already told you, the plants here in Eden Labs are only for experimental, agricultural or terraforming purposes. Landscaping services for private homes in the colony are under a completely different contract. You'll need to speak to someone at Star Farm for plants for your private garden. Yes, I've tried contacting them, but they won't take my calls or answer any of my messages. Almost like they don't like talking to the media, the older man complained. That's where Flora had seen him before. He was one of the anchors from the news. If she'd known he wasn't trying to contact her for a news story, she might have paid more attention to his messages. The Watch didn't want any of the girls talking to the press, but if he wanted horticulture services, Flora was only too happy to provide them. Dr. Rocaille, sir, your next appointment is here. From Star Farm, the receptionist whispered, loud enough to be heard clear across the room. The older man's eyes lit up. In that case, I'll wait here and catch you on the way out, he said, planting himself firmly on the couch across from Flora as he offered her a winning smile. One that was 1,000,000 times more genuine than Rocaille's. Rocaille's smile had wasted away to nothing, until his eyes fell on Flora. Why, Flora, what are you doing here? He didn't seem to want to meet her eyes either, his gaze darting up and down her body like he wanted to undress her on the spot. I'm here to discuss our consulting contract, Flora said tightly, not wanting to go into detail in front of the newsman. She rose and took a step forward, intending to follow Rocaille back to his office where they could talk privately. But Rocaille just stood his ground, not moving. Oh, there's nothing more to discuss. We're satisfied with your services, and have no further need of you anymore. His eyes slid down her body one more time, as if he was tracing the contours of her body beneath her dress. Slimy git. Only he paused when he reached Vertumnus's hand, still clasped around hers. Rocaille paled. Vertumnus. I'm sure the audit isn't until next month. In fact, I distinctly told Hera just last week that by the end of this month, we will have repaid her investment and yielded a sizable profit. Of course, that assumes all the current invoices will be paid on time. Which I'm sure they will be. He didn't sound so sure. Whoever this Hera was, if they could frighten this asshole, Flora liked them already. Vertumnus squeezed Flora's hand. Oh, the audit isn't until next month. Right now, I'm taking a particular interest in Star Farm's affairs, as a personal favor to Hera. Hera was the name of Vertumnus's boss. The mafia boss he owed a buttload of money to. Rocaille's voice had risen even higher, to the edge of panic. Does Hera know about young Flora here? Of course, Vertumnus said smoothly. Hera hears everything. Who would be stupid enough to try to hide anything from her? Rocaille seemed to have lost the power of speech. He nodded jerkily, then scurried through the door and slammed it shut behind him. The receptionist's mouth hung open in shock, making her look more like a dying fish than a model for office attire. Oh, I would love to get the scoop on that story, the media man said. Unfortunately, my producer is even more terrified of Hera than Rocaille there, so I suppose I shall never know. He stuck out a hand. Flora, is it? I'm Prometheus, and if you can get me a kitchen garden growing in time for Pandora's birthday, I can promise you almost anything a being can procure in the colony, and possibly a few things you can't. He winked. Flora definitely remembered him now. He was the flirty newsman, the one who made the most boring stories funny, but he got you interested too. His stories about the fighting arena made her want to actually go and watch the battles. She'd never seen a dragon before. You're interested in growing a kitchen garden in your apartment? Flora asked. She swiped a finger across her tablet, bringing the screen to life. Maybe if you tell me the sort of plants you have in mind, I'll see what we have in stock and what might work best for you. Are you interested in it for culinary or aesthetic purposes, or a bit of both? Everything was still in stasis in the storage sheds, but she could have anything she needed thawed by morning. As Prometheus began to expound on the things he wanted in his garden, Flora felt completely at home. She might be sitting in a futuristic waiting room of a company whose asshole director thought he could buy her body and dismiss it as easily as breathing, between a man she wildly lusted after and a TV star, but designing gardens in space was what she'd wanted to do for as long as she could remember. Finally, she was getting her wish. When the conversation was finished, it was Flora who held out her hand to him. "Prometheus, I think I can help you. How does next week sound for installation of the first prototype kitchen garden in the colony?" He beamed in delight, seizing her hand in both of his and shaking it vigorously. "I'll have a media crew on hand ready to film every moment. I'll still have to pitch it to my producer, but leave it with me. By the time the story airs, everyone in the colony will want you to come work for them. You won't need to waste your time here with Rocale." More gardens. Flora could barely contain her excitement. Maybe things were looking up, after all. It was almost dark outside by the time they returned to Star Farm. Flora tossed her tablet on the desk and threw her arms around Vertumnus. Thank you. Going out there was the best idea ever. I've been waiting forever to finally use my skills, and Donna said the farm had to come first. But if everyone else does the farm work and I focus on the gardening stuff, isn't this what you were talking about the other day? Finding new revenue streams to increase the farm's profits? He was aching for her before she pressed her body against his, but he didn't want to ruin her moment. And this was her moment. "We should celebrate," Vertumnus said, reaching down to loosen his pants just a little so they wouldn't be quite so painful. "Oh yes. Let's go back to your place," she said, eyes shining. Then her smile faded. "You're not happy for me. What's wrong? It will be profitable, I promise you. We brought everything we needed from Earth, so I won't have to buy anything. The only cost is time, and it's not like I'm on a salary or anything." Her eyes were big and round now, utterly woeful. "Please, what's wrong?" "The garden, the thing with Prometheus, it's all great. You should definitely do it. It's just, Rocale. The way he looked at you. The whole time we were there, I was trying not to punch him for it. If he touched you, I might have," he admitted. What was wrong with him? He'd wrestled with his brother when they were kids, but he'd never been one for violence. It was far more satisfying to bankrupt a man than break his nose. Noses mended, but financial ruin was forever, as he should know. I couldn't stand the thought of him touching what was mine. Those green eyes flared with anger. "I don't belong to anyone. I'm my own person and no one, no matter how much money they might have, can buy me." She stepped back, out of reach. "You're just as bad as all the rest of them. If you weren't up to your eyeballs in debt to Hera, you'd have tried to buy me, wouldn't you?" Agony sliced through his heart. "No. 1,000,000 times no. I know more than anyone what it's like for someone to own you, body and soul, and I couldn't wish that upon you. Not ever, no matter how much I want you. But when I saw him looking at you, the way he looked at you, like he thought he knew you because he owned you, I wished I could. I wished I could be like my brother, and gamble everything on a turn of a card or a throw of the dice, until I had the crazy kind of money some men have. The ones who own companies and people, who can afford to eat at Forge every night, because I want you to be mine, so no other man can touch you. I know why he paid 5 times what any of the others did to have you, without having to ask him. It's because you're perfect, superior to all the other girls here. Your aunt knew it, and all the girls know it because they all want you in charge. Everyone wants you, because we all want a little perfection in our lives, and you're right here, not up on some pedestal. You're real and so stellar. I still can't believe you were willing to share my bed for one night, let alone two. I don't want to own you. I just don't want anyone else to. Stars, he was terrible with words. Comus had been the charming one. He would have known what to say. Comus wouldn't have had Flora staring at him, trying to make sense of what he'd said. Finally, Flora swallowed. What do you want, Vertumnus? He laughed. Right this minute? I want to tear that dress off you, and bend you over the desk, and fuck you until you scream. She stared at him for a long moment. It might have been less than a second, but it felt like an eternity to Vertumnus. Then she said slowly, that would be damaging farm property. She tugged her dress over her head and draped it across the chair. Her underwear swiftly followed, before the beautiful naked girl before him bent forward over the desk and offered herself to him. You know, she tossed over her shoulder, if you'd tried to buy me from Donna I probably would have let you. Because I don't want anyone else except you touching me either. Now fuck me please, like you just bought me, and you want to make damn sure I know who I belong to. Vertumnus nearly wept, as he freed his cock and buried himself inside the most incredible woman he'd ever known. Vertumnus palmed her breasts as he drove deep inside her, then stilled. Something slipped between her legs, silken soft, before it began to work her clit. What in the stars, she began. Vertumnus chuckled. Did I not use my tail on you before? Ah, because I preferred to taste you. Now though, I want you to come for me. Then will you fuck me? I am fucking you. Too slowly. You want me to go faster? But his cock didn't move at all. Instead, his tail went into a frenzy, rubbing roughly against her until she couldn't help but scream. Vertumnus. What? She asked, still woozy from the power of her orgasm. My name. When you come, I want you to scream Vertumnus. 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 I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm about to come again. Vertumnus, oh fuck Vertumnus. Then he began to move within her, in rhythm with his wicked tail, and Flora was soon too breathless to say anything, but that didn't matter, because this time, he was going to come with her. She could feel him tensing behind her, so close. Vertumnus, I'm going to. He pushed her over the cliff first, before following her down into a spiral of ecstasy. Are you sure you're not coming with us? Kalina asked, twirling so her skirt flared out. They promised there'd be dinner and dancing this time. Flora shook her head. You have fun, but I have work to do. It's only been a week since Prometheus aired his feature on the garden I did for him, but the orders have been flooding in so fast, the waiting list is up to 8 months already. And they're still coming. We're not going to have enough people to tend the actual farm at this rate, if we're all in the grow shed or out in the residential domes, planting gardens. Kalina shrugged. You should get Linnea to help you. She's afraid doing anything with heavy machinery might hurt the baby, so gardening would be way safer. Flora nodded. I'll ask her. Is she going tonight too? Nope. She said she wanted to get an early night. Needed more sleep. So if you're planning on inviting the hot fawn over for the night, you probably won't even wake her. Kalina winked. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Flora laughed. Shouldn't I be the one saying that to you? Aren't you speed dating tonight? Kalina shook her head. Nope. It's the cantina's first ever palmy night. Stars only know what the meat under the sauce and cheese actually is, or if it's just deep-fried protein bars, but word is the chips are made from real potatoes, so if the palmies are bust, I'll just order another round of chips and it'll be fine. Sure you don't want to come to Star Farm's first ever girls' night? Next time, Flora promised. All good. I call dibs on the hot bartender, though. Flora laughed. Is that the guy with the wings? The very same. I'll take horns and a tail over wings any day, Flora said. Kalina grinned wickedly. Oh, but this alien's got all three. If I find out what he can do with them, will you tell me all the details about your hot nights with the fawn? Not likely. Flora could barely believe some of the things she'd done with Vertumnus. You have a good time, Flora said, waving her out. Just in time too, because Vertumnus had arrived. He greeted her with a kiss. How's my brilliant businesswoman today? Flora blew out a breath. I think we did triple the number of orders we had yesterday. Vertumnus's eyes grew wide. Seriously? I thought the rush would have died down by now. It's only been a week, and you've already made more than I owe Hera. Maybe I'm in the wrong business. I should try my hand at gardening. No way. You mistook sage for spinach. They were both green. I was too distracted staring into your eyes, he protested. Flora only shook her head. Vertumnus was a wizard when it came to business and numbers, but he knew very little about plants. If you're ever looking for a job, I'd hire you to run my office in a heartbeat, as long as you stay out of my greenhouse. What if I bend you over one of the tables and show you a good time? Well, what if I bend you over the desk here, right now, and… One thing led to another, and that led to another, which left them both panting some hours later, lying on the table, side by side and very, very satisfied. Until the comm chimed. They both swore, then reached for their tablets. Vertumnus grimaced. I have to take this. He angled the tablet so Flora was out of sight, then cleared his throat. Hello, Hera. Flora stilled, not daring to make a sound. You do good work, Hera said. I have it on good authority that the watch took one look at Starfarm's files and closed the case. Vertumnus had already heard this from Flora, who'd heard it directly from Detective Violet. She'd also said that it was partly because of Flora's high profile in the media, thanks to Prometheus. So Flora's safe? Vertumnus asked. Himself he wasn't so worried about, but Flora was another matter. From the watch, yes, and I've put out word that she's not to be touched. Why waste such a valuable asset? Flora frowned. Now Vertumnus's mafia boss knew about her? That couldn't be good. As far as your work goes, cleaning up after Donna, I think you deserve a bonus for it. I could do with more staff who show both initiative and loyalty. That only made Flora wonder what had happened to the other staff. Also nothing good, she suspected. So after that neat week's work, you have officially repaid your brother's debts. You're a free man. Flora wanted to throw her arms around Vertumnus and hug him. She knew how much that meant to him, especially when he never thought he'd ever work his way free. Of course, I'd still like you to work for me. There's the Eden Labs audit next week, and a few other matters, but if you wish to undertake some freelance work in between, I won't object. I believe Star Farm might want an office manager. Flora closed her eyes. How did this woman know so much about her and the farm? They want a part-time office manager, leaving me plenty of time to take on specific projects for you, as required. That sounds like a good balance, Vertumnus said, keeping his voice carefully even. Any word on what happened to Star Farm's previous administrator, Donna? A decidedly evil chuckle. Oh, you can tell your farm girl not to worry about her aunt anymore. She won't be bothering her again, and she'll leave her a nice little inheritance, too. See that she enjoys it, once all the media attention has died down. Media. Flora reached for her tablet, and searched for Prometheus's news channel, careful to keep the volume muted. There was blurry footage of what looked like the cargo deck of a spaceship. Enjoy your evening and get plenty of rest before the Eden Labs audit, Hera said. Vertumnus let the tablet clatter to the table, and blew out a breath. "Well, glad that's over with," he said. Flora dialed up the volume, just as a picture of Donna appeared on her screen. "Vertumnus, you need to see this." Former manager of Star Farm, Donna, was found this morning in the hold of a mining ship. In what appears to be a terrible accident, she was trapped in the hold when the cargo bay doors opened to the vacuum of space, Prometheus said, looking grave. Why she was there, we may never know. She leaves behind her niece, Flora, the up-and-coming garden expert at Star Farm. When he proceeded to show a quick montage of his gardening segment, Flora reached to turn the tablet off. She'd heard enough paeans of praise about her cress, chives and basil. "We have a breaking news story coming through. Sorry folks, the sports report for the arena will have to wait. It appears there's been an explosion in Metropolis City tonight. People are fleeing the smoke-filled scene and it's difficult to tell how much damage has been done, but the Humans First Party are already claiming responsibility for the attack." A shaky image appeared on the screen, obviously taken from a tablet in someone's hands as they ran away. Then the smoke cleared, and a sign came into view. A sign that hung across the doorway of a building, blocking access in or out, as smoke poured out through the gaps. A sign that read, "First Shot Cantina." Flora's hand flew to her mouth. "Stars, all the girls are there tonight." Prometheus continued, "As yet, we are unsure how many people are still trapped inside the building." The sound of voices outside had Flora scrambling for her clothes. She had to go and see if all the girls were all right. The group who appeared looked soot-smeared and not quite as polished as they had when they'd left, but they seemed happy enough. Flora scanned their faces, and her heart sank. "Where's Kalina?" she asked. "She was chatting up the barman, getting drinks for us all while we were dancing. Then the explosion happened, and we ran for the door." "Did she make it out?" Flora persisted. "I don't know. She's not answering her comm. I didn't see the barman, either." As if on cue, the horned, winged barman's picture appeared on the screen. 3 staff, including Wings, Hercules, the new owner and his wife, have been reported missing. As yet, we are unsure if anyone is injured or still trapped inside the building. Flora closed her eyes. "Someone call the watch. Tell them Kalina's missing." Horns. An alien sci-fi romance. Book 4 in the Colony, Nick series. Written by Demelza, Carlton.